Good morning. Good morning. My name is Steve Gleave. I'm the SVP of Marketing at Metaswitch Networks. We're a London, Silicon Valley company in tandem. I know you all have a choice in breakfast entertainment, so thanks for choosing me today. Appreciate that. My opening session, in fact, really this whole conference is going to be about belief. And belief in something that we're calling the software telco. And by having belief in this, this is why Rich Tarani and the good people at TMCnet have invested in this inaugural conference. This is why I think we will be seen as pioneers in this space. I think many people in this room will quite possibly work as partners as we try to move the needle and get down this path towards being software telcos. And that's a really important theme that's going to run through this. Now, I don't normally do traditional presentations, but when I do, I like to start with a quote. So let me put this one up there for you right now. Believe in something. It might be religion, it might be your family, it might be the love and passion you have for your work, it might be all the things I just mentioned together. Studies have shown when we believe in something, it helps provide us with meaning, motivation to put through tougher times. Remember, if you have a why to live for, you can tolerate anyhow. A lot of people are nodding, you're all very familiar with this. I know that if you're going to look for a quote yourself, you don't go for the cliche Nietzsche or Churchill or Reagan. You all go where I go, right? Straight to the maven of self-belief, Gillian Michaels. Exactly where we all go for motivational quotations nowadays, I know. She is, of course, a trainer to the stars. She's been a star in her own right. She's the star of a TV show called Biggest Loser. Runs here on NBC. And the reason that I chose a quote from Gillian Michaels was that I, like many people in this industry recently, have been following what is perhaps one of the most visible trends in the telecommunications space, and that is the amazing case of the incredible shrinking Rich Tarani. I don't know how many of you have known Rich over the years, but I'm going to guess Rich has probably lost maybe 40 pounds over the last X months. And to do that, to lose weight, to have a goal, you really need to have a number of things that happen, right? Now, in the world of losing weight, there are a few things that must take place. One, of course, is having a good diet. And I was motivated just to take this opportunity to clear something up, because I think it's really important, and you may be sitting out there confused right now. Just want to be clear on which Metaswitch I represent. Because if you, like I'm sure you do, have Metaswitch programmed into your Google Alerts, you've got a lot of alerts lately from this Metaswitch. They make metabolic enhancers, slimming bars. Just wanted to be clear that we as a company help telcos lose weight. We help them lose weight in their central office. We help them thin that out. We put soft switches in. We put software in. But this is a different Metaswitch to us. It does actually look like a pretty viable brand extension though, so it might be an acquisition target right there. 3 or 4 billion. No forward-looking statements though, so I retract that right now. Apparently it's also a pyramid scheme if anybody's looking for some end-of-quarter revenue. We'll start shipping some of that out. Right? But the right diet is important, okay, if you want to lose an amount of weight. And of course another thing that's important is belief. Belief in the benefits, a belief in why you're going in the direction that you are going in. Now here's another guy who had belief. Backwards. Here's another guy who had belief. Charles Lindbergh. I don't know if you know this, but in 1919, a guy called Raymond Orteig offered a prize, $25,000, for the first person to fly non-stop from New York to Paris. We all know who won? Charles Lindbergh. But what a lot of people don't know is that he was actually the contestant with the least amount of experience. He was referred to by many at the time as the flying fool. And yet we all know that through Lindbergh's vision and bravery and belief, we gave birth to a global aviation industry. So let's take this concept of belief. Why do we believe in anything? Why did Rich believe that he could lose some weight? Why did Charles Lindbergh believe that he could fly across the Atlantic Ocean? What is it that makes us believe in anything? Well, I think there are 3 tenets of a belief system. And the first thing, of course, is the facts. What's really difficult in today's world is to know exactly what the facts are. Because anybody can issue a press release. Everybody's got Twitter. And you don't really know when you're reading stuff whether these are the facts or not. So what we tend to do as individuals is we tend to take the facts as they apply to us. Here's a great example, right? This survey here was by Gallup, which I think is a British survey research company. They did this in 2007. And what they wanted to know was, they went around the world, they went to all these countries, and they said, do you believe that humans are the cause of climate change? Do you believe that we are the cause? And this map basically covers our answers. Now, yellow is at the bottom of the scale. Basically, when they ask people in these yellow countries, they're like, what? Global warming? Had no idea. And if you go to the countries that are the darkest on the map, they're the ones who have trouble looking themselves in the mirror, because they believe we are accountable for this concept, this trend of climate change. Now, America had this kind of what I call Procol Harum moment, slightly wider shade of pale. We're in the bottom third here. They didn't actually believe that humans were causing global warming. And of course that's easy to agree with, because when you leave the faucet running or you take the car down the store, it's really hard to relate that to what might be happening. But what you can do is take the facts as we do experience them. You see, 5 years later, Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies ran a survey, and they found out that 70% of Americans believe in global warming. Not necessarily humans being the cause, but they believe in global warming. And of course they're right to do so, because in that period we've been through the sort of tornado devastation. In Oklahoma, we've seen the effects of Hurricane Sandy. So we take these facts and we personalize them and say, now we believe. That tends to be what happens. So using the facts as they relate to you is very important in belief. The second thing in belief is, what are the experts saying? Are the experts in agreement? This was interesting in this survey. They actually asked if Americans thought that scientists agree. Not if scientists are right, but whether they agree. And what we're finding now in this world where there are so many opinion formers out there, everybody can have an opinion, everybody can tell it the way they think it is. Our belief is impacted in whether a sort of core number of people are actually starting to agree. And then the third thing that it can impact your belief is whether you perceive there to be a sense of urgency around the issue. This is when you start to personalize it. When's this going to happen? What's it actually going to mean to me? And if you don't feel there's a level of urgency around that, your belief wanes. That's why people blow hot and cold on global warming. Which is a terrible pun, I'll take that back. But this is what happens, because it all depends on your kind of window of view. In this survey done by Pew Research Center earlier this year, they said, how big of a threat is global warming to your country? And again, we put this in a context of urgency in America. You can see in America here, they said, yeah, it's kind of a threat, but things that seem much nearer are much bigger a threat. Financial instability, North Korea's got nukes, that was the kind of the threat. Whereas in Latin America, they said, no, global warming, absolutely, we see that as the number one threat. I think they're misguided. I think the number one threat to Latin America is English soccer hooligans going down for the World Cup next year. Who knows? The Europeans, very sort of middle, not too left, not too right. I thought they might have said being spied on was their biggest threat, but apparently not. They're over that already. It's kind of cool. So we tend to have priorities and beliefs based on facts and based on urgency and based on what the experts say. So how are we going to apply that to the software telco? Let's get into the core of this message. And for me, I think if we're going to believe in a software telco, we've first got to define what it is. Then we can look at how those three tenets apply. So a software telco to me is this. Now I'm not going to read all of this out, but I wanted to make sure it was on a slide so that you guys could have it after the event. To me, a software telco is really 5 things. A software telco is transforming. It's transforming its network architecture. It's transforming the way it does business. A software telco is separating. It's taking network control logic that forever has been locked into, joined at the hip with proprietary hardware. It's ripping it out and it's putting it on COTS hardware in the cloud. Software telco is programmable. It's got a rich set of APIs from layer 1 to layer 7, all the way down to layer 1. It's probably got the soft SDN underbelly that allows it to deliver a programmable network as a service. The software telco is agile. It's working with vendors that use agile DevOps techniques, churning out new releases every couple of weeks. Telcos aren't stuck in these annual cycles of upgrades that they used to be. And of course, a software telco really, I think, fundamentally understands that this transformation is a business necessity. They want to leverage these architectural best practices that OTT operators have used against them. Those 5 things will characterize a software telco. So let's get into these 3 things: facts, expert opinion, and urgency. How's that going to impact our belief in the software telco? Well, here's a fact to start it off, and Rich talked about this already. Unequivocally, for traditional service providers, the revenue cost model is broken. The cost of running networks has been increasing exponentially while operator revenues have plateaued. There was a time, good times, when voice was the main service and the cost of running a voice network was a lot less than the revenue that could be generated from it. And of course, data devices came along, consumed a lot of traffic, needed to be subsidized. All of that money to run that on the network to subsidize these devices started to kick up the cost of running networks. At the same time, if you're a wireline operator, you had to support things like Netflix, huge amount of cost in running that over your network, at the same time as revenues plateaued. Operators might have been a bit quick to go offer all-you-can-eat bandwidth services. Net neutrality laws prevented them from charging for all of this content that was coming on their network. OTT trashed perfectly good sources of revenue. People started cutting cords. People started realizing that telcos weren't that good at innovating anyway. And of course, the government said, we're going to change the way we regulate this industry. We're going to pay you less now, subsidize you less for voice. Because the government really is just acknowledging what we all know already, there's diminishing value in a voice minute. So you end up with this fact, there's a challenge that says costs are way more than revenue. Undeniable for traditional service providers, that is a fact. Second fact that really influences our thinking here is that software is eating the world. Now this isn't my phrase, this is Mark Andreessen's phrase. You'll be very familiar with him, the original founder of Netscape, the Netscape Navigator. He penned an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago where he said, software is eating the world. He said, internet-based services and software programming techniques have now reached the point where pretty much anybody can start a global company, a global brand, overnight, without any capital constraints, geographical constraints, resource constraints. You can just go and make that happen. He said, all of the most exciting brands in the world are software companies. Probably the largest online retailer, Amazon, largely a software and some logistics company. Google, biggest direct marketing company in the world, software company. Biggest video company in the world by subscribers, Netflix, software company. Biggest telco in the world by subscribers, Skype, software company. Most innovative movie company in the last 10 years, Pixar, software company. Software ate photography a few years ago. Look at the brands you're familiar with, Spotify, Evernote, Dropbox, LinkedIn. They are all software companies. And they've been able to establish themselves so quickly because of the availability of this low-cost cloud. And the third fact now is that the cloud offers cost-performance benefits that are absolutely undeniable. It doesn't matter if you're going to use a public service like Amazon Web Services, if you're going to roll your own, use something like OpenStack. You can now do real-time communications in the cloud, and the cost benefits are completely and utterly undeniable. Advances in multi-core architectures, advances in onboard cache for these CPUs, advances in how we handle media and being able to tie media on the NIC to the virtual machine through a hypervisor or using bypass techniques like Intel with DPPK has ensured that any cloud can handle the demands of real-time communications. And if you want an idea of how the cost benefits are going to play out here, let me give you a couple of examples from Amazon lately. I used to say that Amazon Web Services, they offer two products, EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, and Simple Storage Service, S3. I used to say that they had dropped that price of those products, get this, 24 times in 6 years. 24 times they dropped that price. I was wrong. Apparently it's 38 times in 7. Who's counting? It's an unbelievable amount of cost benefit they are delivering. What you tend to do with Amazon, you go in and you reserve compute instances based on what you think you're going to need. You reserve these compute instances. Amazon now lets you sell them back. It lets you trade them if you don't use it. They are making this environment as elastic and cost-effective as they can. They can do this because their economies of scale are staggering. They had as much equipment every day than they had in their entirety when they were a $5 billion business in 2005. As much equipment every day as they had back then. They build their own servers like Google does because they think that saves them about 30% on every box. They're even building their own substations now to power these data centers. Google's the leader in this. Google data centers in this room will know that about a year ago, 13 of probably the leading operators, telecom operators in the globe, got together and wrote a white paper on NFV. And they brought it into the market at the SDN Openflow World Congress in October of 2012. And you get this paper online if you haven't read it, and in this paper these operators say, I want my NFV, right? This is why I want network function virtualization. I want to run my network applications on the same infrastructure as I run my IT. And the operators were united in the benefits that this would bring. Now again, I'm not going to go through all of these today. But the power savings of a start are obvious. If you can put network applications in virtual machines, not only do you have the benefits of doing that on your IT infrastructure in your cloud, you can consolidate those virtual machines when loading in the network is quite light. You can power down servers as you consolidate more virtual machines onto these servers. The network intrinsically becomes more programmable. These guys want to maximize the speed of innovation, but they want to minimize the risk of rolling out new services. If rolling out a new service is throwing on some software onto existing hardware infrastructure, that's a lot easier than what we've all built for them in the past. So they're in agreement, these 13 operators. Infinetics did a survey a few months ago where they asked 21 operators what they thought about the benefits of NFV, and I've asterisked those there, so more agreement. In fact, when this NFV paper was presented, they ended up creating a working group inside ETSI, an industry standards group, specification group inside ETSI to represent that. There are now 25 operators in that group. So operators agree, experts agree in the benefits of network function virtualization. And what about the vendors? What are the vendors saying? Well, I'm only going to talk quickly for Metaswitch today, because that's probably my best area of knowledge. But from a Metaswitch perspective, we're just saying it can absolutely be done if you have the know-how. You see, it's really, really, really difficult, if not impossible, to take software that used to run on proprietary hardware and move it onto standard hardware. It just doesn't work like that. The kind of know-how is you need to know how to write for multi-core CPUs. You need to know how to use the onboard cache rather than sort of third-party memory or TCAMs on the outside. There's other chips that you typically use in proprietary appliances, DSPs, crypto chips. You need to know how to engineer around that. You need to know how to program at the kernel level so that you can keep this product performing even when there's lots of traffic that you might want to be discarding. So you kind of need that know-how if you're going to write high-performance network products on standard hardware. Then you've got to be able to tune it for hypervisors. Maybe using Open vSwitch, DVDK, SRIOV. There are techniques now for bonding virtual machines to the traffic that's coming in these COTS cloud environments. And then finally, you really need to know about how to write natively for a virtualized environment. And this is completely different to how products have ever been written before in the telco world. How do you build a scalable solution that instantiates and accesses virtual machines as you need them? How does that interoperate with a cloud and management orchestration layer that can tell you when to spin stuff down, up, and when to take things down? How do you create an HA, telco grade 5 nines HA environment in something that is ostensibly 3 nines? How do you put all of this together? How do you maintain state in something that is largely stateless? All of that know-how exists. We're quite fortunate at Metaswitch. A few years ago, we started developing a session border controller that we built for COTS and virtualized environments, bare metal servers and virtualized day one. So we learned a lot of this. And then as we went along, we also said, well, what if we wrote something natively for the cloud? And a couple of years ago, we'd written some mobile app that allowed you to share stuff with you were talking on mobile phones. We built all of that in Amazon Web Services. So we took that knowledge and we said, let's build a complete IMS core. A complete IMS core. Let's create it so that it will instantiate on something like Amazon Web Services with a single click. One click to instantiate an IMS core on AWS. And then let's make it open source, because surely that's a trend the telcos might want to embrace. So I know there'll be conversations and chats later on open source, so I'll leave it at there. But I think what's happened here, and I just speak from Metaswitch, there's lots of vendors out there doing great things. You know, we now have carrier class SBCs all in software, running on bare metal or in virtualized environments. We took some of our protocol stacks and turned them into virtual products, BGP, Virtual Route Reflector. And then, of course, this Clearwater IMS product. This was the web-scale, open-source IMS product that we went out and built. So I think this combination of vendor enhancements, operator thirst, operator understanding of the benefits is really fueling the market now. That ETSI ISG working group I talked about, 150 members already, more than 25 operators. In 10 months, they have created 5 specifications. An industry group creating 5 specs in 10 months? It's unheard of. I used to say if I ever had a week to live, I would join the telco, because every day would seem like a year. It would make my life extend out another 7. I can no longer say that with these speeds of developments in NFV. They've ruined a perfectly good line, which is very upsetting. ENTC, the European Advanced Network Test Center, they've done some proof of concepts for this. So they did proof of concept with virtualized SBC, the proof of concepts with service chaining, proof of concepts with deep packet inspection. This IMS thing that we created has been downloaded and used by more than 40 people, service providers, test houses, people wanting to write applications for IMS. It was used by a consortium called Cloud NFV. This is Tom Knoll from CME Corporation. Tom said he was going to get together 6 vendors to start doing proof, trials, network virtualization. But he wanted new vendors. He went and got Dell, and he got Orchestrate, and he got 6Wind. And he put these companies together, and they are now working on realizing the benefits of NFV, and they're using things like Clearwater as their IMS virtualized applications. Great work by Cyan with what they're doing with Blue Planet, and of course Alphaloo. We know we've got a guy talking from Alcatel today in Cloudband and the great things that's bringing to the industry. I think if you look at AT&T's Domain 2.0 announcement, it talks very publicly about separating hardware from software, separating control plane and forward plane, blessing NFV and SDN. And of course, the cloud wars just continue, right? Amazon Web Services, I've given you examples of that. They're competing with VMware, vCloud, and IBM, and Google with their Compute Engine, and Windows Azure, and all of these things. And it's terrific how much performance they're adding as they simultaneously drop costs. So the experts agree, the vendors agree, the cloud companies agree, the operators agree. And what's really nice, I think, is they also agree about what needs to be done. Not just saying, oh yeah, we're ready to go here. There's a lot of work still required in cloud management and orchestration. There's a lot of work still required in how you actually instantiate telco network elements in virtual machines. How you do it for best topology, how you do it for maximum performance. All of those conversations are going on, but it reassures me that the experts are in agreement. So we have facts. We have experts in agreement. Now the last part of any belief system, as I said earlier, is urgency. When does this need to be done by? I used to say, I was living out in California, I was also these things have to happen quickly. And then living in California was always like, dude, what's the rush? Wait, surf, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But I actually believe we are on, say, really, really, really short time scales here. I'm actually going to throw out a date for you all, which I think is the drop-dead date by which this must be done. It cannot take any longer than this. And that date is 2045. Anybody want to know why? Anybody hazard a guess for that date lately? All right, you probably know who this is. This guy called Ray Kurzweil. He's a futurist. He now works at Google, which is scary when I tell you a little bit more about him if you don't know who he is. Well, as a futurist, he was a proponent of this theory that he called the singularity, right? A singularity is basically defined as a point at which a species transforms into something where it is no longer recognizable as it was in its original form. Now, Kurzweil thinks that our world is going to transform by 2045, so we've only got 32 years left, and nobody in this room is going to recognize the world that we live in. So what the hell is he talking about? Why is he so adamant about this? Why has Google brought him in and paid him a big fat salary and said, yeah, get to work? Well, his argument is that computing power is increasing, horsepower is increasing exponentially. His argument is that, look, based on this, by the mid-2020s, we will have reverse-engineered the human brain. By the end of that decade, computers will have human-level intelligence. They'll be able to write music, write poetry, appreciate fine art, tell witty jokes at cocktail parties. Computers will be able to do all of this. And at that point, because computers are then as smart as us, the computers will take over their own development. Because they don't need us anymore because they're now smarter than us, right? What happens after that? We can't say, because we're not as smart as they are. So if we were to predict what happened, that would say we're smarter. Then not the computers will be smarter than us. But Kurzweil says, who knows, right? Maybe, maybe we get annihilated, maybe we share the planet, maybe we'll merge as cyborgs. At the very least, he thinks they'll take our consciousness and they'll download it into computers. So I'm saying that we have to get the network into the cloud by 2045, because that's where we're all going to live. And if there's no jobs when we get there, we're all going to be like really pissed off. So it's vital we get this done by 2045. Sounds too far, right? I think Rich is going to run this conference for the next 32 years. Let's look at something a little bit more urgent. You know who this guy is? This is Gordon Ramsay, does the show Kitchen Nightmares. He goes around, right, finds these restaurants in distress. Then at the end, they've got like 6 months left, 3 months left, 6 days left, whatever it is. And he says, it's all right, I can fix this. Okay? Need a simple menu, fresh ingredients, liquid paint, smile a bit more. We'll get this taken care of. That's what Ramsay says. And I said, well, what if Ramsay did a show called Telco Nightmares? Right? Because there are plenty of distressed telcos out there. What would be his prescription? I think his prescription would be 5 things. And the first 3 you're all ever so familiar with. Let's just reduce the cost of your current infrastructure. Let's go and make it more sort of soft switch, gateways. That's a lot cheaper IMS elements. Let's look for revenue sources that aren't government subsidised, hosted business services in and out of region. And let's build this IP interconnect infrastructure, because that's the way you need to connect your voice networks as much as your data networks now. Let's make sure it scales accordingly. Let's make sure it stands up under attack, etc. That would be his 3-step plan. If he came back like he does in the show 6 months later, cruises up in his Bentley, asks how's it going. If they'd taken care of those first 3, they would probably have triaged the bleeding, at least. But it's not a long-term solution. To be viable in this space, long-term, you're going to need to make sure you adopt the principles of NFV. You're going to need to take cost advantage of this common IT infrastructure. You're going to need to make this network more programmable. You're going to need to use some of the constructs of carrier SDN to deliver rich API support throughout your network, actively support developer communities. If you follow that 5-step plan, if a telco, I should say, follows that 5-step plan, I believe they are very much on the path to being the software telco. When does it need to be done by? I'm going to say over the next 5 years. In telco terms, that's a world land speed record. 5 years. Why 5 years? Because AT&T and Verizon, they want to rip up everything we did in '96. When we get to 2018, they want to sunset the PSTN. Yeah, we're done with that. That's fine. Let's go. Let's go all void. Maybe by 2018, the government will have finally figured out regulation for voice over IP services. Common playing field for everybody. But when that's done, and when the PSTN is sunset, you would better have a really flexible, elastic, programmable software architecture, or you will not be able to stay in this business. But it brings me on to my close, really, which is the whole so what behind the software telco. And to do the so what, I'm going to go all the way back to Gillian Michaels. I know you were desperate for me to get back to that. So here we go. I'm going to go all the way back to Gillian Michaels and her show, The Biggest Loser. Season 9, winner of Season 9 is this guy. Oh, right here. Michael Ventrella. Biggest loser in Season 9. In fact, he's the biggest loser ever, apparently. Probably not a good title for him to have. He lost in this series 264 pounds, right? 50% of his body weight during the series. 50%. And all credit to him, he's got a healthier lifestyle and he's very happy. But I was reading this article about him. These are his words, not mine. And he was saying, you know, at the end of the day, I'm just a guy that lost weight. He said, I'm finding it hard to monetize that. This was what the whole article was about, him hitting hard times. You know, he said, being a former heavy guy is a bit like being a former comedian. There's kind of no demand for that anywhere anymore. And he's been desperately trying to monetize this. He's got barbecue sauces and diet books, and he does some endorsements and promos for NBC. But at the end of the day, he says, there's Jared from Subway, and there's everybody else kicking around at the bottom. You see, it's not actually the losing weight, it's the business that goes with it. Look at Gillian Michaels, 12 out of 15 shows she's been on there. She's got an online supplements business, she's got an online diet business, she's got a brand new TV show, Losing It. Look at NBC, they had a hit show. They've got cruises, where The Biggest Loser is the theme. They got resorts you can check into, where The Biggest Loser is the theme. It's not the losing weight, it's the business that you put around it. And from a telco perspective, that's critical. This is one of my favorite customers. This is Saddleback Communications out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And I took this picture because I think it's great. This is their manager. What I love about this, a very, very advanced company, always thinking down the right path. I was looking at this picture and I asked him, I said, how come these floor tiles are different? You see those light floor tiles in here? He said, oh, that's when we took out the Nortel DMS. He said, we couldn't get tiles to match in the rest of the room. So these new tiles are a very visible sign of what they took out and what they replaced with. So they are very much on their way to becoming a software telco. I would argue that 5 years from now, they're going to have this homogeneous network architecture that looks very much like this. Common everything. Not separate DNSs for this, they might be using other applications. Everything is common. Common IT, common management, common DNS, common everything to run all of the services, both in-service and things that they might be trying. The most important, they'll have lost weight, but what will their business look like? And I think their business will look like this. Clearly, we've talked about physical footprint and assets. They'll be buying software licenses. They won't be buying lots of equipment anymore. They're going to have some very low-risk projects. You can literally spin up something, run it in beta, see if it works, tear it down. They're going to have the standard IT infrastructure and the huge economies of scale that comes to that if they're buying their own. Of course, they're even using something like Amazon Web Services. Much dramatic, much more lower cost base. And this is going to make them look more like the kind of Facebooks and Googles of the world architecturally than that they look like today, which is kind of more sort of water company, power company, boring, stagnant, hard to move forward utility. This is the promise of the software telco, and this is why we all need to believe in it. I'll leave you with one final quote, and I often think, well, what are the next steps then? Well, where do we go next? And part of me just says, look, let's keep going down the path we're on, because this path has already been very well described. And it was described for us by a guy called JBS Haldane. He was a British biologist from about 100 years ago, evolutionary biologist. You know, nice sort of waxy tash there and starched shirts. You know, very British in his approach. And he said, look, there are four steps on the path to scientific acceptance. Whatever I'm asking you to believe and accept, there are 4 steps along the path. And it's exactly the same now with the software telco. He said these 4 steps along the path are as follows. Step 1 is where everybody goes, well, this is worthless nonsense. This new idea makes no sense. Worthless nonsense. And then, of course, time passes. You get a few personal facts. Okay. That was interesting. It's a bit of a perverse point of view. Experts don't agree. Everyone's got their own opinion. Yeah, okay. And then the 3rd step along the path is you start accepting the fact, right? This is where you start saying, well, the facts make sense. This is true. But it's a little bit unimportant right now. This is where the urgency kicks in. And then the final point on the path to acceptance is, of course, the one that I theme my presentation around, where everybody says, oh, I always said so. You go from completely dismissing the idea to completely embracing it. I'm glad you guys have all come here today. I'm looking forward to this event 3, 4, 5 years from now, when this room is 10 times the size, and it's full of people who are all saying, the software telco, I always said so. Thanks for your time this morning. Hopefully we'll have a great conference. Appreciate it.